This is a KUNV Studios original program.
The content of this program does not reflect the views or opinions of 91.5 Jazz and More, the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, or the Board of Regents of the Nevada System of Higher Education.
Lights, camera, action. Welcome to Rebel Film Friday. We talk about films of all kinds every Friday at 6 p.m. And I'm your host, Cameron. Hello, Rebels, and welcome back to Rebel Film Friday and to the start of Horror Month at Rebel Film Friday, where for each Friday this October, we will cover a new horror movie in the spirit of the spooky season. And Rebels, you're going to love this one. It's a Scream. Today we're talking about Scream, released in 1996, directed by Wes Craven, starring Neve Campbell and Courtney Cox. Scream was released to critical and financial success, as well as redefining the horror genre. Once again, if you haven't watched the movie, please do so, because we will be spoiling all of it. So without further ado, let's get into our first question. Now, my guests today, once again, Corbin, Jaden, and AJ from the previous two episodes.
Hi.
Hello.
Hey, guys.
We're going to start off with the opening to Scream. The opening to Scream is one of the most iconic in film history. The cold open of Casey, played by Drew Barrymore, in her house alone, being called by Ghostface and eventually being murdered is tense and chilling. What do you think makes an opening to a movie iconic, and more specifically, what makes the opening to a horror movie iconic?
What makes a horror movie iconic, or at least the intro, is kind of introducing this looming threat that you don't quite understand, or that there is some undespicable horror at large. What makes Scream stand out above all the rest, though, is the constant mystery of the very beginning. It throws us into it without it properly going into the story, I want to say. We already kind of know what's at hand, and what makes it so amazing is we realize this is a horror movie. No, this is going to be legit, because Courtney Cox, she was very famous at that time.
Oh, actually, it was Drew Barrymore.
Drew Barrymore? Oh, you lied to me. I mean, that's my fault, because this is my favorite movie, so I'm going to say that real fast. Favorite movie of all time, and I love it. But anyways, the very famous actress in the very beginning, who is Drew Barrymore, she dies. Whereas all of the posters and everything, she is the front woman. She's the most popular out of everyone. She dies in the beginning. And I think what makes this movie so iconic is it establishes the scene very well as shows that this movie is not joking. This is serious.
Yeah, I think the movie did a really good job of drawing attention, and that it really subverted expectations. You take this huge actor and you just kill their character in the first scene. Not only that, Scream, Ghostface himself is portrayed in a really interesting manner. Like you said, like you made this looming threat who we know nothing about, but more importantly, we know he's innovative. We know he's absolutely insane. And the final thing that I think really sets this introduction scene, probably one of the better ones, is the fact that it's so irritating.
Yeah.
You want to take over?
Oh, it's totally irritating. So, like, the first thing, it's kind of like later towards the end of the intro scene, but like when Drew Barrymore's character's parents are coming home, they're opening the door, and she's perfectly in their peripheral vision, but they don't see her, notice her at all. And then on top of that, she's holding the phone, and she doesn't try and get their attention other than to try and squeak out some words, but she can't, because she can't breathe. But, like, yeah, it was really irritating.
Yeah, I definitely see how it could be that way. There's a lot of things that Drew Barrymore's character Casey could have done to avoid getting killed by Ghostface, and one of them definitely would have been running when she got out of the door. She decided to crawl under the windows instead of go and just run. Yeah. And even when she started running, she didn't have shoes on, so she's like tiptoed. And finally, she had like the phone in her hand when she was over near the porch. She could have like thrown the phone at them to try and get their attention. Yeah. But no, all she did was lay there and die. It was annoying, but I can see why. I could see like the reasoning for it as well. And I really like the intro because it sets up the story in many different ways.
Yeah.
So we later on learn that Casey is one of the killer's exes. So Stu's ex was Casey, so that explains why they killed Casey at the beginning of the movie. And also it sets up the breadcrumbs of who's the killer going to be, because the killer loves horror movies. He's conniving and kind of psychotic, and he is athletic, as we can tell, because he's able to basically run after her and immediately like take her down, but not so athletic that people can't fight back, because Casey's able to fight back against him for a little bit.
Something I do want to add, what I think makes that intro so special, is it has that mixture of the typical horror, like, oh no, what am I gonna do, all this other stuff, but also kind of introduces like a little bit that these people kind of know they are a bit more common logical sense, because I feel in any other horror movie she would have died a lot faster, but she actually procrastinated her death. There's definitely steps that she could have done to, get some help, but for the most part she kind of did some stuff that most typical people wouldn't have done. They would have opened the door, they would have ignored all this stuff, but I think that's what this movie is perfect for.
I thought something was interesting about this movie, and I'm not sure if it's true about the sequels and the more modern ones, but I really appreciated that the killer, even though he's obviously psychotic and everything, they're like a human. Like, you can beat them. They're not like Mike Myers, where he gets shot off a balcony and survives. Like, he can be beaten, which was, I thought, makes it more interesting even.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think that's definitely what separates it from a lot of other horror movies, because in the film throughout, we kind of have these rules, and they're a bit more, to be fair, there's definitely scenes where it's like, you should have done this, but for the most part, they're kind of smarter than most horror movie characters. And I think that's what makes this amazing, as well as what you're saying, that this is human. This is something that can entirely be plausible. This can be entirely plausible. Someone going out, scheming all this stuff, and it is perfect. This is what I think makes this an amazing horror movie and stands out above the others.
I definitely agree with all those points, and I feel like we've wrapped up that question pretty well. So we're going to go on to our next one. Scream is both an homage and a parody of the horror movies that came before it. There are multiple references to horror movies like Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, and scathing critiques of horror movie cliches, such as saying, "I'll be right back," and never coming back. Such as Sydney saying the girl being chased runs upstairs rather than out the front door. What do you think is the attempted effect of these homages and critiques?
I want to say, to me, it feels like this is a horror movie made for horror movie lovers, because of all these kind of little skid bits, as well as they kind of have, towards the end, they go over the rules of what not to do in a horror movie. And I think that's what makes it amazing, because you can finally be like, finally, you didn't go alone into this room or whatever. And of course, Sydney's friend did, and there's obviously some, stupid horror moves, but the people actually kind of know what they're talking about. It just feels like there's coincidences or chances or whatever. What is legitimate in this real world? There are chances of X, Y, and Z happening or not happening. And just the homages really drills that in on, this is a horror movie for horror movie lovers.
I think on the parody aspect of it, even though this movie was, obviously pretty violent and everything, there was bits of comedy scattered throughout that just made it really enjoyable to watch, because they were just perfectly playing into a lot of those horror movie kind of cliche things that I thought were really well done, even still. It was a good movie.
I feel like they used the cliches in the horror movie gimmicks perfectly, not in a manner that felt like a cliche, more felt innovative and humorous to some extent, especially Casey. Was it Casey? No, it was Sydney's comment about running up the stairs when you should be going out the front door. And then the way she locked the front door so she couldn't go out the front door.
Yeah.
And on top of that, even the when the principal is looking around in the school for the person who's knocking on his door, we meet the janitor wearing the sweater with the hat, who's old, and his name is Freddy. It just feels all perfectly placed. It doesn't feel like they're trying to rip off or gain success off of other horror movies, but almost to kind of give them an honor or like a little bit of a laughable mention or whatever. And it just makes the movie funny. It has some funny elements to it, and I don't think it actually takes away from the movie.
I agree.
On the topic of the homages, I have a whole list here. There were so many that I just loved picking up on. So they talked about Hellraiser and Evil Dead when contemplating what movie to watch. Frankenstein was playing on the TV. Of course, you mentioned that the janitor had the Freddy Krueger outfit, as well as his name was Freddy. They talk about Texas Chainsaw Massacre. They talk about Prom Night. Jamie Lee Curtis as the Scream Queen. Driving Down to the Mackenzies is something that's referenced in, I believe, Halloween. They talk about Candyman, The Exorcist, Halloween, Terror Train, The Howling, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street. All of these different references really show that everyone who worked on this movie loved horror movies. And while there are parodies of what horror movie characters do, it's also a love letter to the genre so that they can continue to redefine it and continue to make it what it has been over the past multiple years.
Yeah, totally.
All right, so next question. The mystery throughout Scream, the whodunit mystery all throughout the movie is one of with lots of misdirections and twists. In the end, it turns out both Billy and Stu were the killers and set this up a year ago when they killed Sydney's mom. To give a little context, Billy's mom and dad got divorced, and his mom left because Billy's dad was sleeping with Sydney's mom, so they killed Sydney's mom and framed another guy who was sleeping with her. Now, a year later, they planned a mass killing. Did you see the twist that the killers were Billy and Stu before it was revealed? If so, what clues did you see that made you suspect them? And if not, what threw you off the case that made you think otherwise?
Yeah, so at first, the introduction of all of the suspects was really well made, like in the park where they're all sitting next to each other talking about who could have been the killer. And so, like, from that point on, it's like totally anybody's game. Like, if you guessed it, then that's good on you. But, like, everybody had something that made you suspect them. So, and then throughout the story, they drop evidence of like the boots, so it could be the police sheriff. They say that the phone calls were traced to Sydney's dad, and then even later in the movie, they show Sydney's dad's car. So like you're all over the place. I was jumping from guesses from left to right, and so yeah, it was interesting. I didn't expect Stu. Or I didn't expect two people to be killers, actually.
We watched this movie together, and frequently we'd pause, and Cameron would say, "What are your guys' guesses as to who Ghostface is?" And every time for us, it would change between like 4 different people. That I could not pick up on it being Billy and Stu. Billy was such like they threw it off at the beginning with having him caught and then released, and then Stu, I just never would have guessed Stu personally.
For me, mainly, this is my 11th time, but watching this movie because I love it. But first time, my guess all the way through was Billy. But I always had this weird suspicion that either he was able to really cover his traces well, or there was potentially another killer. I could never figure out who the second killer was, but rewatching it, and I'm sure anyone who does rewatch it, you can clearly see the signs on it is both of them, whether it's at the fountain where they're chatting and let me pull up his name. I completely Stuart points at Billy and he's like,
Stuart.
Yeah, Stu.
Yeah.
Stuart. Stu.
Full name.
My bad, guys. I wrote it down on my notes and I read it quick. But Stu points out and he's like, maybe it was you, Billy. And you can hear Billy kind of almost go out of character. And he's like, how do we know it's not you, Stu? Why are you blaming me or whatever? And they kind of get into these arguments. And even during the video store scene, the Blockbuster, you see on how they kind of tag team together. I always, rewatching this, I thought it was strange and kind of obvious when you see the on how he's Stu's quote unquote friends with Randy. Let me make sure. Yeah, Randy. Yes, I had to make sure. He was friends with Randy, but then, you know, kind of turn against him and like help Billy out, kind of intimidate Randy, even though like Stu and Randy are supposed to be friends. So seeing it, I could definitely see who the killers are now.
I feel like it becomes more and more prevalent through the movie that both Billy and Stu are not all mentally there, more so than the rest of them, because we're probably going to talk about it later. None of them are 100% mentally there.
Yeah.
But especially the scene in the Blockbuster store with, I think his name was Randy,
Yeah, it is
Billy and
Randy.
Stu.
Randy, Billy, and Stu. Randy was Stu's friend, and he was the one who was helping out Billy when Billy was kind of intimidating Randy.
Yeah. Now that it's a kind of a giveaway, but you still don't expect it because you don't really suspect those two characters more so than anybody else at the time. And then other things like the boots. I think you talked about the boots briefly, where we see Ghostface's boots in the bathroom stall, and then we see the sheriff's boots, and they match.
I think it's just genuinely incredible because, I mean, it throws everyone off. Whereas, like most horror movies, it's one suspect. In most crimes, one suspect. This movie kind of flips it on his head, and I think that was probably the biggest twist ever, where it is two people. It wasn't one. Everyone is thinking it's one because they're the exact same under with the mask on, and I think that's really incredible. Even I was having doubts about that as a theory when I was first watching it.
Yeah, when I was first watching it, I'm someone who really likes murder mystery movies, so I was doing the thing a lot of people do when you're trying to figure out who the culprit is in these kinds of movies. So you put down, do they have the opportunity, do they have the motives, and do they have the means? And the thing that really threw me off was at the end, Stu and Billy said that their motives were incidental, pretty much. They said that there was no motive. They're just psychos, right? And that's kind of what makes them kind of terrifying as killers, is that they don't have a reason to be doing this. Billy has a little bit of a reason, but Stu doesn't. Stu is just crazy. Well, peer pressure, too, is what he says. And I think that the mystery is really well done. Lots of good red herrings. I know initially I thought Randy was the killer because, one, he's really into horror movies, and we know Ghostface is. And two, he has like the hots for Sydney. So that would give him a motive as well. But in the end, he actually ended up being just a regular person, which I think is actually a really cool red herring for the mystery.
I thought the suspect that was really obvious through the movie, but is also like almost so obvious you think, oh, it couldn't possibly be him, is Billy, because every single time he would conveniently show, like he would come back on screen after something happened with Ghostface, so you're totally expecting, oh, it's definitely him, but they drop it so often throughout the movie, you're like, oh, they're trying to throw me off here. So I thought that was, yeah.
They do amazing with how they throw people off, especially with the red herrings and everything. I think it's just overall well done as a mystery because there's so many suspects. Everyone has something wrong with them. But some of the details are so plainly in sight, you just kind of overlook them or think, like what you're saying for Billy, it can't be. It's too obvious.
Yeah.
And I think they just play on that detail so well, which is why most people don't expect for those two, and overall don't expect for there to be two killers, because it's just out of the blue. You're thinking, it's got to be one. It's got to be this one. And what you guys were saying with Cameron, your thought process, going to change every single time of who did it. And I think it's amazing.
Yeah, I really like the mystery in this movie, but I think it's time we wrap up this question and move on to another one. And one that is discussed whenever you watch a horror movie. Let's talk about the kills. Staples of the horror genre, kills can be amazing. They can be gory, they can be epic. What is your favorite kill in Scream and why?
Here, I'll go first. I think one of my favorites... this is like so hard because I want to say it's either the very beginning on how they kind of, tear out the insides, and because it feels they properly introduce like how serious this killer is, how like sadistic they are, because they actually took out the insides and had the time to kind of use it as a rope or whatever to hang them. But if it isn't that one, it's so hard. I want to say it's either that one or the scene where they kill Tatum with the garage door.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. The reason why I really liked the that kill is because she was actually fighting back and she was winning at a certain point. And then to Jaden's point, kind of the movie being a little bit irritating, she decides to try and squeeze through the cat dog door and get stuck.
Which is just a prime opportunity for him to hit the button and
Yeah.
she just gets crushed. I didn't see the kill I wanted to see in this movie. I really wanted Gale Weathers to die.
Oh, same.
But the first two kills in the beginning, what were their names? Casey and Steve?
Yes, Casey and Steve.
Those were my favorite. Just setting up how, like he said, sadistic and innovative Ghostface's was. Those two kills were perfect for that.
Yeah, I think that my favorite has to be the garage door kill. It's so iconic, and plus the quote before it, no, Mr. Ghostface, don't kill me. I want to be in the sequel, is so iconic and just a staple of horror movies. Like I've heard that quote everywhere, even before I watched it for the first time, which was a couple years back. But it's like ingrained in my mind now as one of those famous quotes I'll never unhear. All right, so let's move on to the next question. Who is your favorite character in the movie and why? Now, Jaden, we all know who your least favorite is, so let's focus on some positives here.
What was the officer's name?
Officer Dewey.
Dewey. I loved
Yeah.
Dewey. I just wish he was more intelligent about the people he picked to love.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, yeah, he fell real hard for Gale in the
That
movie.
upset me on a personal level.
On a personal level. Wow. I'd say my favorite character has to be Sydney. I mean, she's one of the better final girls that you see within the horror genre. She's pretty competent at what she does, and she actually makes fun of a lot of the horror tropes of, like, you know, like I said earlier, the running upstairs when you should be running out the door kind of thing. And so there's also a scene where she's alone at her house and Ghostface is like, I'm on your front porch. And she calls his bluff. And I think that's really cool. It's like bravery in a sense. I wouldn't call it recklessness. It is recklessness. However, she does show bravery throughout the movie. And she's just really cool all throughout it.
For me, I mean, I'm going to agree with Jaden. When I first watched that movie, and even to this day, even watching the sequels, knowing everything after, even rewatching that movie, I still hate Gale Weathers because throughout it, I'm like, oh, she's going to become a better person through all this. Immediately after almost getting stabbed and dying, quick, we need to film this. Like, have you learned nothing?
I
Like,
respect the hustle.
for me, though, I would have to say it's a tie between Randy and Dewey because I love Randy because he feels kind of like me on how the whole, you do not do this in a horror movie. You do not do X, Y, and Z. That is dumb. You're going to die. All this other stuff. But I also kind of like Dewey because he's just one of those lovable characters. You can't really hate him. And he's just one of those uplifting people where, I mean, one of my favorite quotes is, when I wear this badge, you treat me like a man of the law. While his sister is like literally yelling at him in the whole police station and all in front of his coworkers, which I think is funny. But funny that you mentioned about Sydney, Cameron, because I do agree with that point of she's one of the better final girls. She's not as good as Ridley, but she kind of has fight in her. She knows what she's doing. She has been making good distance. She hasn't really done much of stupid mistakes as other, final girls have done. But she's actually strong. She's putting up a fight. She's not purely running away. That's what she does. But towards the end, which really, gained bonus points for me, was she fought back and truly fought back. She killed her killers, and I think she's one of the more amazing final girls. And I would consider her on the same tier as Ridley or one tier below, but still good.
Yeah, all right. I think, Sydney's probably the least irritating character in this movie.
Yeah,
personally.
I agree.
I don't know if we talked about Stu enough.
Stu, played by Matthew Lillard, actually got the role basically by accident. He was accompanying his girlfriend to an audition, and just out of nowhere, a casting director heard him and it was like, yeah, you'd be perfect. Come here. And he's really good at what he does. He's very expressive, and his line delivery is really great. I like it a lot.
You can move on.
All right. So, next question. Let's talk about Billy and Stu's plans. Honestly, to me, it seemed a little bit lucky sometimes, and it felt like they were looking out at certain people not being very smart. Do you think Billy and Stu's plan of, for example, the lack of perception from Casey's parents, as we talked about earlier, and Dewey getting stabbed in the back by the killer and not like shooting? Do you think that the plan is more luck, or do you think it's more maniacal kind of like thinking?
I would say definitely a mixture, because there's some elements that you can't control, and especially comparing it to other plots or whatever, this I would probably say is one of the better, because they've kind of thought of it all, or at least most of it, and they have backups for a lot of the stuff. However, I will comment about the whole Dewey situation. Being a solo cop and clearing a room can be dangerous, especially because there's so many corridors right there, and you don't know where the killer is hiding. But I will definitely say it's kind of a mixture of both luck and planning, because you can't plan for every outcome, but I mean, luck got them pretty far.
I thought luck definitely kind of carried them, at least in a lot of aspects, and also for like the survival of Sydney. So like how everybody just starts showing up at the very end, and she manages to escape. Like luck seemed to be a big part in both the killers and the survivors.
I don't have any thoughts.
All right. Well, I definitely agree. And I like your point about the police officer. It's something that I was kind of wondering about because we don't actually see him get stabbed in the back. So I was wondering like what actually happened. So maybe there's a lot of like corridors and spaces in the house. So maybe he was like jumped. But at the same time, there's a level of vigilance you have to be aware of. So I don't really know. Let's move on to the next question. We talked about earlier, Sydney's friends are all a little bit crazy. Stu talks about the gutting of Casey. Randy is into horror movies. Tatum vividly describes the murder scene that happened at the start of the movie. And Billy has the cold killer demeanor of a psycho. So do you think this is anything about teens and how like media influences them and how we're kind of darkened by our exposure to things like violence? Or is it, as Billy says, movies don't make psychos, movies make psychos more creative?
I was actually just about to use that quote for kind of my point. I don't think it fully influences. I think it's kind of an outlet or whatever, but I don't think it can just change a person or decide if, showing your child a horror movie, if they're going to become a psycho killer or, the most precious gift on this earth. Like, I just think it's a way to kind of express creativity or kind of open up routes. I don't think it's more so forcing or like heavily influencing a person or their thoughts.
I think to that point, like there's always something there to begin with. I don't it's not going to, in my opinion, I don't think it's going to completely make you do a 180. There's already something going on for you to be convinced to do something like that.
Yeah, no. Billy especially, sorry. Billy did have the motive necessary to just be a psychopath. What was it? His mom left him and his dad. So there's always some precursor to some bigger picture.
Yeah, they did say his motive is technically incidental too. So he's just a psycho by himself as well. And I definitely think, going back to what AJ said, that it's not really the horror movie's fault, or like this, like the desensitization is kind of on the parents, not the media. So better parenting should be encouraged, not repressing media and repressing art. But that seems to be our time for today. So remember, Rebels, you got to follow the rules so that you can be in the sequel, and we will see you next week on Rebel Film Friday.